Jim Notestein, former county commissioner and an activist in our community for a long time. It's Heritage Day here at the Matheson Museum, and it's October 23rd, 1999. Jim, we're going to talk a little bit about you, your role in the community, and some personal history and some Gainesville history here on one tape. When did you come to Gainesville?
In the 13th grade, 1961.
What brought you here?
Well, that was it, the 13th grade.
Yeah.
Decided I was going to be an astronaut.
Yeah.
And so they had a wind tunnel here and the aerospace educational program, and just my luck, when I got here, they started to tear all that apart. So shifted to chemistry, went then to architecture and city planning, and then they gave me my sheepskin, and off I was.
What do you do today?
Well, a variety of things. You know, I'm fascinated by our history also in this community. Every place has a wonderful history. And one of the things that I thought I'd use sort of as a mnemonic device is the sandhill cranes, because birds, as we're coming to discover, have been engaged in their social activities as a race of creatures for maybe several 100 million years. And the sandhill cranes are particularly interesting to us because they migrate periodically from north to south over Alachua County and stay sometimes even in Alachua County to overwinter. And one of the things that's interesting about those kinds of creatures that fly in the V formation is that they take turns in leading the formation. And the reason they do that is because there's a tremendous advantage to the rest of the tribe following the leader, because the air turbulence, much like the porpoise riding the bow wave of a boat, breaks the resistance of air and is about a 70% advantage to follow in the V formation. Now, they don't always have the same leader in the V. That position rotates because it's an extra special hard job to break the wave of the air. And so they rotate in that position in leadership roles. And of course, the honking, the plaintive cries we hear of the sandhill, and this is also true for the geese and the ducks and every other V formation tribe of flying creatures, they honk to encourage, or they call out to encourage those who are in the lead. It's sort of like, row, row, row your boat, you know, because we're getting somewhere. So that kind of idea of the metaphor of the citizen as activist is a good takeoff point for using that idea of the birds and their cooperative efforts. There are lots of other things that we could bring to that message. But one of the things that I thought I'd share is the basic difference between the types of activism motivations. Maybe there's sort of two basic kind of activists. One is sort of the Thomas Jefferson kind of person who perhaps is in love with the American ideal of liberty, justice, and equality, and finds that these measures, these goals and high ideals are worth adhering to and struggling for, even though the consequences of their not being followed may not fall too heavily on that individual's shoulders. And then there's another activist type that perhaps gives little thought to those American ideals of liberty, justice, and equality, but because of some circumstance of life, gets hit right up square the head with some aspect of their living, which causes them to be concerned that perhaps their liberties or freedoms have been infringed or somewhat affected, and for that reason they then become involved. So we might say Thomas Jefferson or Don Quixote, and a range of behaviors in between there.
Which are you?
Well, I've always been fascinated with the Alexis de Tocqueville analysis of American democracy when he visited here from France and observed some of the outstanding and unique characteristics of the American democratic movement. And of course, Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine and the early folks who were involved in this idea of independence, the more I discover about these people and their motivations and their expressions of liberty, the more interesting and relevant it becomes to our present life, since these factors of liberty and loss of liberty are sort of like the yin-yang symbol that we see, where the dark and the light fish chase each other constantly in the circle but never eliminate the other. And so that there's this constant need to be vigilant, as we understand the price of liberty is vigilance, constant. So I hew, I suppose, to the Jeffersonian concepts, and he had a famous phrase that one should take a turn in public service and then go back and live on the land under the laws that you would help to promulgate while in leadership positions, much as the cranes would take their turn at the leadership in the V. So this idea of taking an active role was interestingly expressed after finishing the graduate program. We had an opportunity, since I was primarily a bicycle person then, to help create one of the first bike paths in Alachua County on the University of Florida campus with the help of my professor, Orion Veterquist, who was the chairman of my program, and also Noel Lake, who's a retired now landscape architect of the University of Florida. And using some sort of simple academic techniques, we expressed some ideas for bike paths as an alternative to the road building frenzy which was going on nationwide, and especially at the university and this city. In fact, there was a major project to build a intrastate highway across the University of Florida, and that, of course, got a lot of people's attention. So there was the contrast even there of the kind of motivations where people were reacting against a bad project and becoming involved in expressions of liberty, and those who had the preconception that perhaps freedom to move should also include non-auto forms of transportation. So we went to the City Commission finally after the university experience was so successful, and got their support for creating the Bikeway Advisory Board in the early 70s. And many of the people who were actually involved in that project, that first advisory board, are now no longer with us. But anyway, that event now has borne a lot of fruit and, of course, given a lot of opportunity for people to travel safely in our community without the use of an automobile. And following that experience, we also had quite a bit of pleasure in working with the local governments and local other activists on matters of energy conservation, which spun out of the project where GRU, our local utility, wanted to get permission to build Deer Haven 2, which was a second generating plant to handle expected needed capacity. And instead of going toward load management or conservation measures, which some had suggested would be an alternate path, the city was pushing strongly for more generating capacity. And as a consequence of that disagreement, a sort of settlement arrangement was to create the Gainesville Energy Advisory Board. And so serving on that for several years was a very good opportunity, useful experience to understand more about the workings of local government. And then there was an experience in the mid-70s where we were going through the bicentennial operations, and there was a lot of recognition that despite the benefits that many had achieved in our culture and in this community, there were still many who were left out, and yet were part of the basic foundation, the so-called agricultural aspect of Alachua County. A little side note here, I like to refer to Alachua County as Florida's first county for more than alphabetical reasons. Yeah. So we have this strong agricultural base, which many would wish to deny or use as a medium to hold land out of development until it's ready to make a profit. But the object of trying to improve conditions for consumers and producers of agricultural commodities led to the creation of the Downtown Farmers Market in 1976, which was a very wonderful experience and basically was the first direct market, the first farmers market in 100 years in Alachua County, because with the recent resurgence of commercialism, young people would say, well, we don't need farmers, we have grocery stores, that sort of irony. So after the creation of that farmers market effort, which now has since moved out to the north part of the community near the north side of the market, and there's been a proliferation of markets, and there's one again back downtown, there's one at the Butler Plaza, and there's also one at Hale Plantation, and there's talk of more being formed as we speak. So this is very exciting.
What do you think when you drive by those? I mean, you go, this is something I helped start.
Well, it's the interesting process. It's like the Sandhill cranes, you know. We got there, or we're still flying, we're still flapping. You know, there's different people in the head of the V. It's wonderful. It's been an opportunity, and I like to share this perspective, that if I were to have tried to promote to this community making things better for myself, I might not have received less interest. I certainly would have received less interest in that object than if I were to say to the community, let's do something good for the community, and since I'm a member of this community, the benefits by a share accrue to me as well. So this idea of taking part in something which has a net benefit to the community inevitably can benefit those members of the community as individuals. So that difference is I think, important to note. So then I became inspired with the idea of having sat in also on the Neighborhood Advisory Board, which was a creation by Sidney Knight and his wife, Grace, who were wonderful community spirits. I hope there's some note of them in the Sam Proctor files of oral history. Perhaps there is. But remarkable couple of people, and they helped to create the Gainesville Neighborhood Advisory Board, which didn't quite last because it was created by the government rather than by the community. So there's a difference in that sort of avenue. But in any case, I had reached a point to which I thought that near to the front of the V was a place for me. So I ran for the city commission. Now, there were 7 candidates at that time, and I didn't come in last, but I didn't come in first. But I was moving up in the V. And so as a consequence of that, though, apparently there was a stimulating effect upon others in the community. And Gary Gordon, the next cycle, ran successfully as the first environmentalist city commissioner in the city of Gainesville's history, an avowed environmentalist who had been part of the Catfish Alliance, who was sort of himself a musician, troubadour, activist, anti-nuclear person who had gotten quite a bit of attention to the subject of the transshipment of nuclear fuels and nuclear waste through Alachua County, which I must say still goes on. But nevertheless, it raised that subject to the public level higher than it had ever been raised before. And so after Gary's presentation and success, a little serendipitous sidebar here, there was a gentleman, Ken Fonarow, who's the most interesting and charming gentleman. Used to work with the governor's energy office in New Jersey. And one night in the early 70s, he was watching, this would be late 70s, he was watching television up there. And there was a story on the news of a mayor with a guitar around his neck, talking to his manager. And Ken turned to his wife, Andy, and said, wouldn't it be neat if we could live in a town where the management and the leadership seemed to be so in tune with each other? I mean, the musical metaphor. And so Ken came to Gainesville because of Gary Gordon. Now, as a result, perhaps, of Ken being here, there are more Energy Star homes and buildings in Alachua County than there are in any other community in America, because Ken has brought with him a very refined sensitivity and talent to be able to help people, builders, homeowners, whomever, to make their homes as energy efficient as possible. In fact, I embarked on a little project which rang the bell for the most energy efficient renovated home in America a couple of years ago, thanks to Ken. Didn't know it was possible, but he made it an opening opportunity by leading that particular V. So then Gary was successful. Later on, I decided, well, let's try this again in a different venue. County Commission. It was like, the metaphor is the belling the cat. I'm not sure if the little childhood story, the mice are being terrorized by this cat. Well, the cat was the county commission at that time. There was a comprehensive plan that Alachua County had adopted some years in the early 80s as a result of growth management legislation. That county commission, though, had violated Alachua County's comprehensive plan some 200 times by basically giving permission to special interests to develop agricultural land into some sort of commercial or residential mega project that exceeded the intentions of growth management, but nevertheless was awarded approval. And so for that reason, 6,000 Alachua County citizens had organized into a Citizens Conservation Planning Coalition and were suing the county commission. The citizens suing their government. I mean, this is sort of a Jeffersonian reflection of when the king is misbehaving, someone must do something about it. So here are all these citizens wringing their hands. Oh, what shall we do? Oh, what shall we do? And I respected these people because they were persons with whom I'd worked on these previous projects. Well, I remembered the little story of the childhood tale of, you know, the mice thought it was a great idea to put a bell on the cat, but who was going to put the bell around the neck of the cat? I will. And it worked. Not by much of a margin, but it doesn't matter. +1 is enough. So,
what did you learn from your first run that made the second run?
Well, the first run, the gentleman who was running put a hat on his head, and the hat band said, Campaign Headquarters. It was sort of the cool hand Luke approach to things. And of course, having a more serious grounding and having developed a lot more connections and a larger network. And basically, I was flying in a larger V formation several years later, from 79 to 84, was a chance to either move up in the V or, as you see the Sandhill Cranes assembling in their sort of random motion as they get ready to either take off or leave, they're sort of mixing their groups. They're deciding who they're going to fly with. And some of it's, you know, their families, and some of it's their, you know, people they've been eating with or resting with. So there's this voluntary association that the Sandhill Cranes form up. And so this formative process where I've been circulating in different formations around various projects gave me an added credibility and added experience. So that program was interesting and like a postgraduate degree, 4 years of higher education at the public service sector, learning all kinds of things about Florida's first county, its administration, multi-billions dollars of assets in our community, multi-million-dollar budgets, you know, tremendous responsibilities, standing on the pinnacle of the law, doing what was called upon to be done at the moment. One of the first interesting projects was, hadn't been in office 2 weeks,